Hello, my name is Sarah and I work for Career Development and Community Engagement. And in this video, we're going to cover the topic of perfecting your job search. So a few things that we're going to go over today are first to determine a couple of methods of searching for jobs and figure out what might work best for you. Then we're going to cover networking. Then after that, we're going to find out what it takes to get an interview. And finally, we're going to move on to some interviewing best practices. So let's get started. First, we'll start with some job search trivia. If you floated about 100 of the same resume to different jobs, what would be your return on investment? In other words, if you sent the same copy of your resume to 100 different jobs, how many interviews do you think you would get? About 3 or 4 interviews, or about a 3 or 4% return on your investment. Sounds like a lot of work for not a lot of gain. However, what if you tailored your resume, making sure to incorporate verbiage that the company relates to with their mission and values? Your return on investment is going to be a little bit better, about 12 to 15 interviews for every 100 job applications you submit. But then lastly, if you built relationships or had a personal connection within the company, what do you think your return on investment would be? About 70% is the return on investment. So in other words, networking is a really valuable job search tool. So there are a few other places to look for jobs, and one of the most obvious locations is the internet using websites. You can use specific job search websites like Glassdoor or LinkedIn or Handshake, but there are also sometimes industry-specific job search sites, and you can even find job opportunities on the company's websites. As you use Handshake and LinkedIn and maybe even Glassdoor as options for searching for jobs, I would consider searching based on job titles or even job functions and locations. So different companies will call the same job different names. So it's a good idea to do some research to see what different companies call them and then triangulate your search by using lots of different ways of describing the job that you're interested in. But the majority of job opportunities actually come through networking because not every job is advertised. It can be really expensive to advertise jobs and post them on websites like LinkedIn and Indeed. So a great way to search for jobs is to use your existing network and even expand on that network. So networking is the #1 source of job leads. So this graphic tells us that about 70% of job leads are found through networking, and all other methods including website postings, newspaper ads, career fairs. Well, career fairs might fall into the networking category. However, all other job methods are only about 30%. So to get started networking, you can learn that you can network almost anywhere with anybody that you know, whether you know them or you're just meeting them for the first time in that networking situation. And there are some barriers to networking, including being too shy or too busy, but there are networking opportunities happening all around you, such as career fairs, career expos, meetings of professional organizations, or even in your classes. You can be networking with the people that you know, your students, your fellow classmates or your fellow students are great people to network with, as well as faculty members, instructors, even academic advisors and career coaches like myself are great people to network with. And I will also address the idea that shyness is a good reason not to network. Shyness is actually something that we learn when we are very young. If you're shy, you probably learn to be shy just through conditioning, social conditioning. So if we learn to be shy, then we can unlearn shyness as well and have a little bit more boldness in our conversations with other people. Perhaps learning how to network would help you overcome some shyness. So one way to engage in a networking conversation, whether that's at a conference or a career expo or even in your class, it might not hurt to introduce yourself by sharing a little bit of information about yourself using a 1-minute commercial. I'm going to give you guys the outline for 1-minute commercials in a couple of slides. Networking is also a great way to learn new information, so remaining curious is a great way to go about networking. So having a curious attitude means to be asking more questions and perhaps listening more than you speak. So this is a great strategy if you do find yourself being a little bit nervous in networking situations, asking more questions than you are necessarily like sharing about yourself can help you understand the person's needs. It can help you understand more about the industry you're hoping to enter. And don't forget to collect business cards. After you have networked with someone, whether it's like over coffee or in a class or at a career expo or anywhere like that, make sure that you're following up using the contact information listed on the business card. And if you enjoyed getting to know that person, you might even consider asking them to grab coffee with you so you can discuss, an article that you read or get their, take on a topic in your field. It can be anything like that. Or if you're just interested in learning what they do for a living and how they came to do that, you can do that too. But always keep expanding your network, and don't forget that almost every person you meet is a part of your network just by having met them. So this is an example of a 1-minute commercial. It says, "Hello, my name is Susie Job Seeker. I'm a senior in communications, planning to graduate in May 2019. My goal is to complete a marketing internship this summer. After visiting your website, I found that your internship program is nationally recognized. Could you tell me a little bit more about that program?" So I really like this one because it shares just a brief amount of information about the person, but then she ends with a question, which is a natural carry forward into the rest of the conversation. Sometimes it can be a little bit awkward just to say, "I found that your internship program is nationally recognized." And that's as much as you say. That's a little bit awkward. So by ending your 1-minute commercial with a question, it kind of flows naturally into the remainder of the conversation. So I would encourage you, if you're watching this video, to write your own 1-minute commercial. It should include your name, your major, what type of position you're actually seeking, an internship, a full-time position as maybe an electrical engineer, or a full-time position as a marketing coordinator. It could be anything. Also include any work experience, including volunteer and internships, any class projects that you've worked on that might be very pertinent to what you're interviewing for. And then when you combine all of that together and end it with a nice question, you can complete your entire 1-minute commercial. So if you're watching this, I would really strongly encourage you to pause the video at this point and get started on your own 1-minute commercial. This is something that you can keep in your back pocket, so to speak, and use when you meet somebody new for the first time. Okay, moving forward, talking about small talk is something that's really important when it comes to networking. Small talk can be kind of challenging because you have to be able to engage with the person, but also not put your foot in your mouth, not neglect to build rapport. So a couple of do's and don'ts for small talk. Do talk about some of the topics on the left, things like current events, weather, movies, the immediate environment where you find yourself like, "Wow, I've never been to this coffee shop, but it's so nice. I love the environment here." Some don'ts, things that you should avoid talking about: politics, religion, sexuality, or like romance life is not really appropriate. Really anything that could be misconstrued or could be controversial is just not great for small talk. The reason that they call it small talk is because you're talking about really lighthearted, kind of, neutral topics. Nothing huge or, anything that contains any complex information about a person. That's not really appropriate for small talk. So now we're going to move on to our conversation about interviewing. So landing an interview is, of course, the first step to interviewing. So as you've been networking, continue to research the companies that you have learned about and evaluate whether you have the right strengths or weaknesses to be a part of that company. Then if you learn of a job opportunity, whether through online research or even through networking, prepare both a tailored resume and a cover letter, and don't neglect to make personal contact with the person that you met with from that company, or somebody whose contact information is listed on the company's website. So as you prepare for an interview, if you've already been invited to interview, I'm sorry, I realized my hair is doing something silly. As you are preparing for the interview, it's important to know what location you're going to be interviewing. So make sure you know where you need to park, what building number you need to be at, and also make sure that you know what dress code is preferred. It's perfectly acceptable to ask the person who's going to be interviewing you what they prefer for attire. And then prepare for some questions. So that's what we're going to go over in just a moment. We're going to talk about some specific questions. But before we get to that, we'll talk about professional attire. We want to make sure that you're wearing neutral, solid colors. So black and charcoal gray or navy are great options. And then if you're wearing a suit or a jacket, you can wear lighter colors, but avoid bright or distracting colors. If you have chosen to wear a dress or a skirt, just make sure that it has a very conservative length and that it's coming down to your knee. Even when you're seated, you don't want to reveal very much of the thigh. Make sure that it fits you very well and it's nicely tailored to your body. Make sure that it's, been tailored in terms of it being wrinkle-free, or make sure that it's in good condition. And then shoes should also be pretty conservative, always being closed-toed and neat and clean. You should bring multiple copies of your resume, perhaps a reference sheet, and then the materials needed to take notes for your resume. You can also expect to receive some documentation after a resume. You also will want to bring your prepared list of questions to the interview. So here is a list of really commonly asked interview questions. We've got, tell me about yourself, why do you want to work here, why should we hire you, strength and weakness. So these are some great questions to be prepared to answer. For tell me about yourself, this is a great time to use your elevator speech. For greatest strength, be sure to relay a strength that's actually relevant to the position. For the greatest weakness, be able to mention a specific skill that you want to improve on, but then also share how you are actively improving on that skill. Why do you want to work here? Be prepared to explain why this is interesting to you and why should we hire you. Be prepared to share why you have excellent qualifications and how you can satisfy the needs of the job description. So the STAR technique is a way of telling stories in interviews, and STAR stands for situation, task, action, and results. This is how you answer behavioral interview questions. So an example of this is, tell me about a time when you dealt with a difficult customer. So you would use the STAR technique to tell that story, first telling them about the situation, then telling them about the issue or the task that arose, situation that arose or task that arose. Then you'll talk about the action, like what you actually did to respond to that challenge, and then finally the result of your actions. We do have some deeper descriptions here on this slide if you want to pause the video. In the in-person interview, make sure that you take your time to formulate your responses that you want to share, and then always ask good questions. So what makes a good question is one that is not easily answered on the internet, and one that also relays some type of good information about you as a job candidate. Don't neglect to state your interest in the job by saying, I'm really interested in this position, and don't neglect to summarize what strengths you can offer to the position. So we wanted to also touch on some nonverbal communication. So we want to avoid sounding really monotone. We want to avoid doing any type of nonverbal communication that could be negative. So only 7% of our communication is comprised of the words that we actually are using, but 38% of our communication is the voice modulation that we use, and 55% is the nonverbal communication that we use. So nonverbal communication being the gestures that we use, our facial expressions and things like that, really do play a big role in our ability to communicate effectively. So after you've interviewed, that doesn't mean that it's all over, because you should still send a well-written thank you note, which you can find more information about in our career development guide on page 30, and then continue to interview by reaffirming your interest, mentioning possibly something that you forgot in an interview. And you can send either a handwritten or an email thank you note. Handwritten might be great for a more traditional workplace. Email might be better if the hiring decision is going to be made really quickly, or if you're interviewing with a more technologically savvy company.